as Lib Dem MP for Bath and the party's spokesperson on transport and climate change. To my left, Lord Jonathan Marland, Conservative peer, who's the chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council and a former minister, and Dr. Charlotte Proudman is human rights barrister at Goldsmiths Chambers, who specialises in cases related to violence against women and girls. Now, there is so much to talk about tonight. I'm sure we'll be getting questions on the strikes, but lots of other subjects that you might want to phone in about as well. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call, and you can text 84850 and send a comment via Alexa. Just say send a comment to LBC, and don't forget you can watch everything on Global Player too.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's Tamar in Oxford. Hello, Tamar.
Hi. My question is that given the higher intensity of trade unions in the past 6 months, do you think it's possible to have each a period of a general strike within the next 6 to 24 months, or more combined union movement?
Wera.
I couldn't hear the full question, but I get the gist. It's about strikes. And today we have got the teachers' strike.
Oh, it was really, do you foresee a general strike within 12 months?
Well, I hope we can absolutely avoid that, but that needs a really constructive dialogue that the government has with all the professions, including the teaching profession. I was a secondary school teacher. I know that many of my ex-colleagues are highly professional, skillful, dedicated. Our children need a good education. They deserve that. That's the future. So we need to make sure they get their education. But we do not sort of get the children their good education if we are alienating our teaching profession. They're exhausted, they feel undervalued. We need to make sure that they stay in the profession. We need to make sure that the government doesn't create a showdown between unions and the profession so that children can get the education. But we stop teachers leaving in droves. And this is a problem that we currently have. We have a government which doesn't engage. And yeah, I hope we don't come to a general strike, but the government really needs to engage, and it is the fault of the government that currently so many professions and so many sectors feel that the government doesn't listen.
But Gillian Keegan has sat down with the unions, the Education Secretary, on quite a few occasions.
Well,
I mean, are you just saying that she should just give in to all their demands?
I'm saying that what I hear is that these discussions are not really constructive, and she doesn't really properly listen. And I think the government is hell-bent on creating some division and creating some showdown, which I think is incredibly unhelpful. It doesn't really help anybody.
Jonathan Marland.
Well, if you were conspiracy theorists, Ian, you would think that the unions, in conjunction with the Labour Party, are contriving to get rid of the Conservative government. The unions,
it is the job of the Labour Party.
Yes, but it's not the job of the unions, even though they are the biggest funders of the Labour Party, so they're aligned. And I wouldn't rule out any more trouble in the future. I think there'll be a lot more trouble as things get worse. I think the really sad thing is, for me, who has worked in government and enjoyed working with many people in the public sector, but now in the private sector, that the country is in a very bad way. We're paying more tax than we've ever paid, and yet there is a group of people that want to push us further into trouble. And I really hope that both sides see the reality of all this, that we can't cope with the demands that are happening, and that sense prevails over both for the best interest of the country.
So we're paying the highest taxes we've ever paid. The economy is in a lot of trouble. Inflation's at its highest rate. Who's been in government for the last 12 years?
Well, I don't think you need to ask me that question, Ian, because you've been observing like I have.
But I mean, you can't say that it's not the government's fault that we're in this situation.
You can say it is not the government's fault there is a war with Ukraine. It's not the government's fault that we've had a COVID crisis. And I'm not standing up for the government. I'm just saying those are two warlike issues which very few governments have ever had to contend with. Yes, wars we have done, but the war on the country in terms of the COVID crisis has had an enormous financial shock to the system. I think the government did incredibly well in providing furlough for so many people that are now striking, by the way, that I just think it's a shame, and I think people should recognise that it's the best interest of the country that we do all give our bit. I don't want to stay here and pay the taxes I'm paying any more than you do.
That's a completely credible argument, but you hear very few government ministers putting it.
No, I agree, and I think you're totally right, Ian, as you are on most things.
Enough creeping.
No, well, I know when my bread's buttered, but they're so bad at messaging all this. I mean, I said to the government years when COVID was happening, what the country will tolerate is a tax to pay for the National Health Service after COVID. Why don't you go out and say, we're all going to have to pay 5% more tax or whatever it is, all of us, to pay for COVID? And the country will get it. They'll hate it, but they'll get it. They'll understand it. And that then starts rebuilding the balance sheets. But their messaging has been bad. I completely agree with you. It's been messaging has been bad on a number of issues. But that is by the by. The fact is the country is in crisis. If we want to keep pushing it into crisis like I knew about in the 70s, but all the rest of the panel are far too young to have been around in the 70s.
Excluding me, unfortunately.
No, Ian, honestly, seriously, you just don't look it. That's
I was politically radicalised by it all in the 70s. That's what got me involved in politics. And I suspect that's going to happen now, but sort of on the other side. Charlotte Proudman.
I say bring the strikes on. I think that it's absolutely right that teachers are walking out, and I'm surprised, in fact, that not more are. I know that there's going to be a lot of disruption, particularly for state school children, understandably. But I mean, when teachers are struggling on such minimal amounts of money, some even having to use food banks, others having to leave the profession.
Their average salary is £39,000 a year. Now, I think that's too little.
It's actually 50,000 if you include the pensions as well.
It's very, very poor salary for the amount of work that they have to do. Many of them have to work a lot longer than their actual contracted hours. As a result, they're working overtime. Many of the children, especially in some of the poorer areas, are struggling with challenging behaviour, vulnerable needs. Many children on school-free dinners, having to struggle themselves. And then on top of that, they, and school teachers have spoken about this, are actually leaving the profession to do other jobs. Some are earning more working in supermarkets than they're earning as teachers. And these are people that have degrees and are highly qualified and educated. And they're doing an important role in our society where they're educating the next generation of young people, which will then go on potentially to become leaders. Although, of course, we know that many of our leaders go to public schools, don't they? Some of them go to Eton and go to the best.
Some do, some
and
don't.
The most brilliant. Well, the majority of them will have gone to public school, and we know that. And we see that not only in Parliament, but we see it in the Supreme Court and the real echelons of power. And yet our teachers, who are doing a really important job, are deserving of a hell of a lot more money. And we talk about living in a meritocratic society, but of course we don't, do we? Because if we were, why are teachers not being paid the same, for example, as MPs? Surely their job is as valuable as members of Parliament.
Well, that opens up a big debate because...
It's an important one, isn't it?
Well, it is an important one, but to my mind, if you're a member of Parliament, you are part of an elite. You are making laws that govern the whole country. With respect, a teacher is not doing that.
Well,
and I think, therefore, you want to attract the best people into Parliament.
Teachers are actually doing a hell of a lot more important work. And no disrespect to MPs, I know Wera on the panel, but I mean, look at what teachers are doing. They are moulding the minds of the next generation who are going to be working in all manner of professions.
I'm not dissing teachers at all. I was going to train to be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher until my life took a different turn. You were.
I was a teacher.
And
I would like to say something about salaries.
I think we do undervalue teachers in this country, particularly as Wera and I know from Germany. German teachers are civil servants. They're actually banned from going on strike in Germany, but they have a status in society that teachers do not have in this country, and I've never quite understood why that was. But we're slightly going off the subject. Winston.
Well, I share everyone's opinion on belief on the panel that of how important teachers are to society, but they have rejected an 8.9% offer in their wage rises. As we said earlier, the average is 50k, including pension. They were offered.
You can't include pensions.
And also, this is not true. You can make a lot of mischief with this, because I was actually a teacher. So this is some time ago now, but teachers' salaries haven't risen really at all in the last 10 years. A starter salary for an NQT teacher was actually £21,000.
Well, they've now been offered 30,000.
Hang on.
Well, I think Winston should have the right
and can I just sort of say, and you can obviously say average here or there. There's, of course, you can earn more if you're a head of department. You earn more after you've taught for 20 years. But the average, is a bit of a thing.
Okay,
and so
let Winston have his say.
Yeah, but
Vera,
banning around.
Let Winston have his say.
No, go on.
Banning around average salary bands, it is clear that teachers, compared to other professions and to the highly skilled and difficult job that they have to do, I believe they deserve a better pay than they currently get.
Fair enough. So I think that big picture, they are getting top earners in teachers are getting 120,000 a year. If Telegraph today published the EU averages, which are higher. So our EU average is 39,800 if we're going to go off your average rather than the 50,000. And the EU average hours are 250 more hours a year than the UK. And if we zoom out, big picture, everyone is suffering. Inflation is 10%. It's not easy for anyone, but the real problem is inflation, and I think that
It's deflection. Sorry, that's deflection to suggest the real problem is inflation. Of course it's not. Teachers have been struggling for years now, and there hasn't been any real pay increase in line with
9%
never mind inflation, the actual real terms of the amount of work that they're doing. They are undervalued given the skills and experience that they have.
But this has been the case since I was at school in the late 70s.
Well, why should they tolerate it just because it's been the case since the 70s?
Public salaries don't actually create inflation. This is absolutely...
Well, they can do, but not everyone.
Indirectly they do, but really inflation is driven by other things than actually paying teachers their proper pay.
Oh, sure, there's many things that increase inflation, but also if you were to raise the teachers' wages to meet inflation, 10%, then everyone else who's striking is going to want the same thing, and that is going to fuel the fires of inflation. Absolutely.
The basic is that the teachers are leaving the profession in droves. So this is not a way of actually resolving the issue that we have
they're going to make less money outside
that we have
of
got
teaching.
an exhausted and disillusioned workforce, and they are leaving in droves. We need a good motivated teaching force for the education of our young people.
But I mean, there are 17 subjects of teachers, I'm told, and in 14 of those subjects, the government haven't met the targets for recruitment, and that there are more people leaving than coming in. There's only 3 subjects: history, dance and drama were 2. I can't remember what the third one was. So that is a lesson that something is driving people out of the profession, and I suspect Charlotte is right that it is working conditions that are doing that. In addition to salary,
70,000 a year.
No, but you can earn more working as a manager of certain supermarkets. We can see that from the newspapers. So if you've come out of university and you're about to become a teacher and you're earning barely just over £20,000, and you can be earning more as a manager of a supermarket, and you think, well, actually, the conditions are better in the supermarket.
But you see, you don't help your case when
Where's
you
the
exaggerate, because it's not the starting salary for a teacher is 28,000, and in September it's going up to 30,000.
Exactly.
It's not just over 20,000.
It's not very much money, is it?
Well, the national average wage is 28,000, so it's over the national average. And there'll be lots of people listening to this programme thinking, well, actually, I'd quite like to have the national average.
These are university-educated individuals that have had to pay over £9,000 per year and have done a PGC, so they'll have been at university for 4 years. That's a long time.
Yeah, who's going to pay for their wage rise?
Well, we should be paying. Yes, absolutely.
But what's
the
the average age
responsibility
in the
is on the
private sector?
public. So we should be increasing taxes in order for us to be properly subsidising the public sector, starting with teachers. And it's not just teachers, of course. Iain and I have spoken before about defence barristers having been on strike just a few months ago because their salary hadn't gone up for many years. I mean, even if looking at family law barristers, they're earning less than they were earning in 2010. because there have been a cut of 10% to legal aid fees. On top of that, of course, you've had inflation. So you're earning considerably less and doing a hell of a lot more work as a result. So obviously people are going to leave the profession. There's often high attrition rates, especially for women. And so then you start to see a more male-dominated profession. And you have a situation where you don't have equal access to justice, particularly for poorer people who are unable to afford lawyers that have got the amount of time, motivation,
we are
money to
digressing
spend.
from the thing. There's quite a lot of generalisations going on. I mean, your proposition is that we should be paying more tax to pay for the teachers. We're at the highest tax burden that we've had in my lifetime, which is a long, long time. And I think we're at breaking point in terms of tax. I just don't think people will pay more tax.
Well, the question is really what you get for your tax.
It may be all right for you, but
the question is what you get for your tax and your public services, and that's currently at stake, isn't it? If the NHS is at the state where it is at, we are paying tax for a service that is at breaking point, and that's not a good service, and everybody suffers.
Somebody's just texted in and saying a teacher's wage in Germany is 90,000 a year. That can't be right, surely.
Well, I can't.
We will
do a bit of googling in the break.
Well, I mean, my sister's a university professor, and she doesn't earn that much money. Yeah. So I would be surprised. But as I say, you can always make hay with all sorts of statistics. And I think
statistics are helpful.
We should be careful. We should be careful just sort of generalising. The bottom line is going back to teachers. They're leaving the profession in droves, and our young people deserve a good, motivated
Last word on this goes to Festus on a tweet, who says, please tell Charlotte that there's nothing wrong with being a manager in a supermarket or getting paid while to work in a supermarket. Yeah. We all have to eat. Supermarket managers of the world unite. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
21 minutes past 8. My powers of Google are not what they were. I'm trying to find out what the average German teacher's salary is, but they quote them in euros and per month rather than per year, so I'm giving up, I think. We have with us Winston Marshall, host of the Marshall Matters podcast. What is the Marshall Matters podcast?
Well,
it's all about
Iain,
why you matter.
I'm just desperately trying to persuade the world that I matter, even though I know deep down inside I don't at all. It's a podcast with The Spectator where I interview heterodox thinkers. And
what does that even mean?
Heterodox thinkers?
Yeah.
It means people who think for themselves.
Right.
Like these fine people, these fine panellists you have. On difficult issues, taboo topics. I come from the music industry where I think that there is a lot of groupthink that goes on. And so I'm trying to, on those difficult taboo topics, bring the conversation so it's easier for others to have them. So whether that be, we're doing, last episode was on climate, I've done BLM, on Antifa, on just anything and everything really, whatever the difficult topics are.
And have you left the world of music back behind completely?
No, not at all. I actually put out a Christmas song that was absolutely awful, but a lot of fun. I mean, Christmas songs are supposed to be awful, I think. Well, actually, of course, there's George Michael's Last Christmas, which is great, possibly the greatest song of all time, awful. Let alone Christmas song. Oh, okay, well, that's for another time. But it was a Christmas song about Hunter Biden's laptop. Well, actually, it was about Rudolph's laptop. But because it was just the time the Twitter files were going on, and so we thought we'd do a silly little song about the Twitter files and Hunter Biden's laptop.
And how did it sell?
It didn't sell. No, it was a total flop.
Why?
Yeah. But we'd had a cool AI art. But art isn't about money, Iain. Okay. Sometimes it's about expression.
All right.
And moving people.
I believe you. Thousands wouldn't. We also have Wera Hobhouse with us, Lord Jonathan Marland and Dr. Charlotte Proudman. Let's go to our next question. Mike is in Arundel. Hello, Mike.
Good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel. My question is it not possible, for the sake of public confidence in Rishi Sunak, to just suspend one of his senior ministers while under investigation for multiple allegations of bullying?
You're talking about the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. Jonathan, I'm sure you'll be delighted that I come to you first on this. I mean, if I was accused by 24 members of staff at LBC of bullying them, I think I would probably be suspended pending the outcome of that investigation. Wouldn't that be the right thing to do here?
Well, it's such a difficult one to answer. I think if you went back to Nadine, for example, if I'd been him, I would have certainly stood down from the cabinet. He was party chairman, so he didn't have any ministerial authority whilst the investigation...
He was a minister without portfolio.
Yeah, but I would have stood down from that, and whilst the investigation was pending, I think the investigation actually was far too quick. He didn't really have the right to reply. Doesn't mean he was right or wrong, but he certainly should not have been leavers of government. I think that with all these things, it's up to the individual themselves. I'm a great one for resigning. I'm a great admirer of Peter Carrington, and I'm sure you are, Iain, who resigned over what he thought was his lack of performance over the Falklands thing. I think if ministers do feel that there is credence in it, then they should resign as a matter of honour. And I think the more honour that comes back into politics, the better. That doesn't mean to say I'm prejudging what Dominic Raab says. This is being led, of course, by former Permanent Secretary Simon MacDonald. When I was in government, if there was any bullying, the Permanent Secretary would come up to me and say, not that I did it, by the way, you want to be careful how you do that. And this, of course, is the man who brought down Boris Johnson, was sacked by Boris Johnson because he was being very difficult to him. So I
don't think it's him making the allegation.
He's
been called as a witness.
Yes, but he's one of them.
If there are 24 civil servants across varying departments, including the one that he currently runs, it's all a bit of a coincidence.
Well,
none of that have anything...
I'm not disagreeing. I'm merely saying there is one central troublemaker in it. He went live on it a couple of days ago. I think it's One of those things, I think Dominic must, I don't know him really, actually, so he must consider his position. And if he thinks it's an honourable thing to do, stand down, then he should. What about the Prime Minister?
Because if, and I'm not prejudging the outcome of this inquiry, but if he is found guilty and he does resign or is sacked, of course, the questions are going to come back to the Prime Minister saying, well, why didn't you take action before, just as they were on Nadeem Zahawi?
Well, because, curiously enough, I know that it doesn't happen that often these days, you're innocent until proven guilty, and I think that's right. We shouldn't prejudge whether Dominic Raab is guilty. He's saying he's innocent. He should have the right to appeal his innocence, and that is the right of the kingdom. If he's done something wrong, as I said, he should resign as a matter of honour, a matter of principle.
Winston Marshall.
Well, I think I agree in that this, in this country, you've got to be innocent until proven guilty, and there should be all the appropriate, procedure to go through. And but the only thing that sort of struck me, and perhaps is a little controversial, is that the bullying accusations came from the civil service, who I don't particularly hold in high esteem. So. And there is a reputation that the civil service drag their feet, particularly with politicians who are actually elected and represent people. And so whatever happened, I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than we certainly know there at the moment. And so I'd like to understand better.
Are you suggesting they're making that up? All the civil servants are making that up.
I'm not suggesting that they're necessarily making it up, but if, let's say, there's a politician who's trying to be tough and get stuff done, I don't know what happened, but let's say he's trying to get stuff done, and they don't like what they're being told to do, they might then feel like they're being bullied.
Well, I would say, I'm leading a team. I want to get stuff done. Uh-huh. I hope I get some stuff done. And it is a tone that matters. You have to have a team around you. You have to understand everything that you get done. You actually get done as a team. You're most effective if you're a team. Bullying your staff or bullying your team is the last thing that allows you to get stuff done. So where are we if at the top of government we've got somebody who has all these bullying allegations hanging over him, and the Prime Minister is just sitting by? What a terrible example that sets for us.
He isn't sitting by because he's actually instituted an inquiry.
Yeah, he's not sitting by at all. And also, what Winston is saying is what is the definition of bullying rather than anything else. And I think that's perfectly acceptable.
I got accused last night of bullying the person sitting in your chair, Vera, because I apparently cut her off and went to somebody else. Now, to my mind, that wasn't bullying, but somebody listening thought it was. And so I think...
Indeed, but if
we all know what we think bullying is, but I think what Winston's saying is there comes a point, if you're a minister and you feel that your civil servants are obstructing what you were democratically elected to do time after time after time, and then in a meeting you raise your voice... Is that bullying?
That's exactly the point.
The investigation will obviously find out a little bit more about it, but independently, people have raised their issues. I believe, and I'm taking my protection from harassment through Parliament, which is sexual harassment, but also harassment. But the thing is really about a culture change of creating workplaces where we respect each other. Yeah, and so bullying is in the end very much in the eye of the receiver. Absolutely,
I agree with you on that. But Charlotte, is raising your voice to someone bullying?
No, I didn't say that. No, first of all, Vera didn't say that.
No, I wasn't saying that you did, but I'm just asking the question.
I understand that entirely. And I think we have to be really clear that the accusation is not just raising your voice, which some might find intimidating. I wouldn't call that bullying. Certainly there's been a suggestion that one of the allegations is Dominic Raab being akin in his behaviour to an abusive husband, which has resulted in staff experiencing suicidal ideation. Now that is a world away from raising your voice in a meeting or trying to get stuff done. And let's remember, Dominic Raab is not just responsible in part for helping to run the country as Deputy Prime Minister, he's also the Justice Secretary. So he's in charge of our justice system. And yet here he is accused of serious bullying allegations in his senior role, and yet he's allowed to continue in that role rather than being suspended whilst that investigation is underway. Now, if that was somebody else in such a senior position, no doubt within the justice system, I would hope and expect that they would be suspended. It is wrong, and it is a poor example that has been set by our government that other people are looking on. I think it's shameful.
Well, we're going to be talking about this subject a lot more after 9 o'clock, because I want to hear if you've been bullied in the workplace and what you've been able to do about it, if anything. But that's coming up in half an hour's time. Many more questions to come. Mike, thank you very much for that. 0345 6060 973 if you would like to ask our panel a question. It's 8:31. Let's get the latest news headlines on LBC with Charlotte Morgan.
The General Secretary of the PCS Union has told LBC civil servants are likely to continue striking throughout this year. They've joined teachers, train drivers and other public sector workers at the picket lines today. The government says the pay rises they're asking for are unaffordable. The funeral for Tyree Nichols is taking place in Memphis. The 29-year-old died after a violent attack by police officers during a traffic stop 3 weeks ago. And a tiny but highly dangerous radioactive capsule which fell off a vehicle in the Australian outback has now been found. Authorities had been searching the 800-mile Great Northern Highway to recover it. LBC weather, heavy rain for northern Scotland tomorrow, drier in the south with a high of 12 Celsius.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Well, let me reintroduce my panel to you. Let's go right round the table. Winston Marshall used to be the guitarist for Mumford Sons. Wera Hobhouse is Lib Dem's spokesperson on climate change and transport. Jonathan Marland, Conservative peer, former government minister, and Charlotte Proudman, human rights barrister at Goldsmiths Chambers. Right, an Alexa question now from Simon, who says, is it appropriate for Boris Johnson to be making so many statements on government policy, including saying it's wrong to not send fighter jets to Ukraine, now that he's just a backbench MP? Vera, let's start with you. Why should a backbench MP be restricted from saying anything?
Well, indeed. I think Boris Johnson can say what he wants, and he should, if he wants to. Theresa May is often heard in Parliament, and why shouldn't Boris Johnson have his opinion? The question is really how seriously we should take that, and the question is, whether he has any ambitions to come back to any leadership role. I hope he won't, and he has been entirely discredited. I know that in Ukraine, Boris Johnson is highly regarded, and let's just credit where credit is due. He caught those shots right, but otherwise he has been a failed politician, and I hope the country has understood that and is not listening to him anymore. But he can shout as much as he wants. Like me, people can hear what I say. They don't all have to listen to it. I hope people will not listen to what Boris Johnson has to say now. He's discredited, he's gone, he's finished. So let's move on.
It is interesting, isn't it, to compare him with Theresa May, where she is now listened to with a great degree of reverence when she says something. And she was a failed prime minister. I mean, you can't describe Theresa May as anything other than a failed prime minister. And I would agree with you that Boris Johnson is a failed prime minister. But Why is it that in this country we can't seem to work out a role for ex-prime ministers, whereas in America, American presidents are listened to? It doesn't matter who they are.
Well, hang on. Boris Johnson is a failed prime minister because he broke rules and he lied. So let's just be clear about this. Theresa May, we might disagree with her. I severely disagreed with her what she did as a Home Secretary. I think to create the hostile environment within the Home Secretary was definitely it has to be laid at her door. But she had in all she did integrity, and I think that is what Boris Johnson was missing. And for that reason, I think he's much more failed in that sense than Theresa May is, and I'm much more inclined to listen to Theresa May than I would ever be to Boris Johnson.
Jonathan Marland, I imagine you know Boris Johnson quite well. Wouldn't a period of silence from him be welcome?
Well, that's quite hard to achieve if you know Boris, as I know Boris. Look, every prime minister in recent times is a failed prime minister. It's only history that dictates whether a prime minister is successful or not. So I think we should pass on that. I think he's perfectly entitled to talk about Ukraine. He's just been out there. He's a national hero in Ukraine. He was one of the leaders of the world that led the support for Ukraine, which I believe was right, and he obviously believes was right. And for the sake of democracy is indeed right. And for human right, it's right. So I think he's perfectly entitled to talk about it. He's just been out there. He's been close to the action, so he knows what's going on. And I disagree. I don't think he has been pontificating about government policy in other areas. He's been enjoying putting hay in the loft, as I've described it in the past, and that has been his focus. But as he's been in Ukraine, I think he's perfectly entitled to talk about it.
Do you think Rishi Sunak is wrong to refuse to send RAF fighters to Ukraine?
I think at the moment, yes, definitely.
He's wrong?
Yeah.
Charlotte?
I think it's definitely right not to send that. Sorry.
Oh,
it was a double negative.
So you agree with
you've got to be very simple.
You agree with Rishi Sunak,
simple questions
not Boris.
to me. Yeah, I agree with Rishi Sunak. Okay. We shouldn't be sending fighters to the Ukraine.
Charlotte.
So Boris Johnson, I mean, I think it's fair to say that I'm not his biggest fan. But I mean, I think it's right, as Wera says, that he has the right to be able to speak about all manner of political issues as a backbench MP. The question is who he holds sway with and whether he still has credibility amongst not only his peers, his constituents and other members of the public. I suspect that he is biding his time and waiting for a comeback into politics, and so laying the ground in an area...
Well, he's still in politics, isn't he?
Forgive me, when I say politics, I mean Prime Minister. That's what I mean. And I suspect he's laying the groundwork for that in an area which he obviously feels very comfortable in, and he feels that, you know, he has a lot to offer. I know many people disagree with that, but it's something he obviously wants to opine upon, and he's given a platform to do so.
Okay. Could I just interject with a couple of facts, if I may? I know he's not laying the groundwork, because I know. And he's got to, because I know him well enough to know.
Has he actually said to you, I never want to be Prime Minister again?
No, he's not. He's never said that. And you wouldn't ever say, I never, ever want to do anything. And you know that as well as I do.
We have to judge people by what they do and say, don't we?
No, and what he is concentrating on. Well, I mean, you can play with words, Iain, and you're better than anyone at doing it. But the fact is, that is not his focus at the moment. His focus at the moment is going through the committee that has the standards committee that is very important, which could prevent him from being Prime Minister anyway, ever again, or in fact an MP. And the next thing is he is in quite a vulnerable seat. So those are the things that he's going to focus on. And that is why he didn't come back. When he came back, he didn't run to be Prime Minister.
He might be my neighbour. According to the local media,
really?
He's looking at a house in Tunbridge Wells. Mm-hmm. For a rather sizable amount of money, I have to tell you.
That is the really moving up market.
Exactly.
Well, they're screaming kids.
Just as I'm trying to move out. Winston.
Well, the only thing I'd add, and perhaps it's a slight disagreement with my co-panellists, is that his voice has quite a lot of gravitas on the international level. And so even though we know he's just a backbench MP now here, when he says something, he's, as has been said, extremely popular in Ukraine. And I think his voice, what he says, will be heard by the Kremlin. And I think, considering this is such a sensitive war, and we are in danger of escalation to an extremely this could go awful. And so actually he should be a bit more sensible about what he says, and perhaps to speak with Sunak about what's appropriate, given that every word can have a consequence. An
Alexa message here saying you're all communists, and if I had my way, I'd shoot the lot of you. That's
Thanks, Alexa.
that's from Vladimir in Moscow.
That's hate speech on LBC.
Let's go to our next.
Can I say I'm not a communist, please?
Let's go to Stephen in East Grinstead. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, good evening. I'm enjoying your fiery panel this evening.
Well, it's
the
quite
Prime
a sparky
Minister
one,
made
isn't
it
it?
to 100 not out today. Do the panel think he'll reach the next general election without being bold?
100 days since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. It seems so much longer, doesn't it, in some ways. Will he last till the next election, or will he be bold? Winston?
I don't know the inner workings of the Conservative Party. I don't know what's going on in there. So I don't
think anyone knows.
No,
well, consider yourself lucky.
They need. Well, I don't know who the other options are. What we saw when Boris ended his premiership was that there's absolutely no talent in that party. Actually, there's a couple, but they didn't. I thought Kemi would have been a good option. I'd have much preferred her than Rishi. But aside from that, there's a severe lack of.
Vera's just fainted.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can get to why you dislike Kemi in a second. But aside from that, I don't see any real talent in that party. So if Rishi doesn't continue, who's going to take his place?
Charlotte?
I'm not going to speculate as to who's going to take his place. I'm not a Conservative Party supporter, and even if I was inclined to be,
really, that's a surprise.
With the current front bench, I definitely wouldn't be inclined to be a swing voter either. I mean, Rishi is more drippy Rishi. I mean, he just, certainly when I watched him at PMQs against Keir Starmer today, I thought he was really struggling. And I think Keir Starmer's right to say that he is weak, or he certainly comes across as weak. Of course, there have been a lot of scandals more recently involving many of his MPs, but he hasn't acted quick enough. And we've just spoken about Dominic Raab, and in my view, that's another example of fatal error of judgment. And as a result of that,
so you'd rather he rushed to judgment rather than went through due process?
I don't think it's rushed judgment.
That coming from a lawyer, I must say, a human rights lawyer. I think that's a bit.
Totally disagree with that, and I think that's wrong to even suggest that. This is someone who's been accused of something very serious regarding his own staff members who reportedly experiencing suicidal ideation. Why on earth should he continue in that job while the investigation is ongoing?
So you want all the people you work for to be guilty until proven innocent?
Certainly not what I said.
Let's just go back to Rishi Sunak.
One at a time, Winston.
If you get rid of ministers as soon as anyone's accused of bullying, then that's just an easy way to get rid of him. Oh, I accuse him of bullying. So we have to wait and find out whether he's actually been bullied. You can't just take him down.
Justice does have to be done, but it's important that there is a process in place so that staff members can continue working so that they feel safe. Mm-hmm. And to suspend someone while that investigation is ongoing is part of the due process.
Sure, but then the civil service can then just accuse everyone of bullying.
Are you suggesting that people lie about bullying and harassment?
Let's just come back to
I don't think it's out of the question.
I don't think it's out of the question.
Okay.
And my panellists to my right
let's just go back to the
Vera.
question. We were promised the first speech that the Prime Minister made was accountability, professionalism, integrity would be the basis of his government. What does he do? So the first thing that he does is he gets back within 6 days Wera Braverman, who had to actually step down and was sacked because of a breach of code of conduct. He had to finally get rid of or sack Nadeem Sahawi after allegations were floating around since the summer, and he turned a blind eye to that one. We are hearing now, again, Dominic Raab. He can't make up his mind about whether he should be suspended.
Can we get back to the question?
The question is, what do we get from this Prime Minister?
No. The question is he going to last till the next election? That's what our listener wants to know.
He is presiding over a party that is just fighting with each other and not really getting anything done to solve the crises that this country faces. I I don't care who's at the helm of this failing party. I just focus on the next general election, make sure that the Conservatives are not in government anymore.
Which is quite difficult when your party's polling 9 or 10%, isn't it?
We are doing quite well, and
Well, you're not.
Wait and see.
You're clearly not.
You wait and see. We are preparing the ground and look and wait and see what happens in local elections. I remember last time in 2019,
No.
I was predicting that we would be doing very well. We are building from the grassroots up. We are doing well.
Local elections don't necessarily translate into general election results, though, do they? On that bombshell, we will move on in just a moment and take more of your questions. It's 8:46.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Winston Marshall, Wera Hobhouse, Lord Jonathan Marland and Dr. Charlotte Proudman with us answering your questions. Right, here's a text question, an important one from Caroline in Lewis. A Labour MP says she was bombarded with death and rape threats after speaking out against the horrible Andrew Tate. What do we do about this scourge of misogyny sweeping through young lads online? And the MP that she's referring to there is Alex Davis-Jones, the Labour MP for Pontypridd. Now, this is clearly, I mean, we've all read about Andrew Tate. What I found out today was I couldn't believe it, that Piers Morgan had him on his show like 3 days before he was arrested. I found that very odd. Charlotte Proudman, this is kind of your area, isn't it?
Yeah, they invited me, actually, I say they, a podcast invited me to come on and debate with Andrew Tate just shortly before he was arrested and Greta Thunberg took him down in one of the most famous tweets of last year. So for those who don't know, Andrew Tate is a well-known self-proclaimed misogynist, and he has had billions of views, more views than there are people on the planet, and he's extremely influential in propagating a view that women should be objectified, degraded, and viewed as subservient to men. He's spoken about victim blaming in cases of rape. He says that a woman's role is in the home. He was booted off Big Brother after a video emerged of him beating a woman. And then he bragged about using a scam by way of webcams, where he put women in a room and they were on a webcam and they were to speak with men, and he charged about, say, $4 an hour, making apparently an absolute fortune of this. And then he put up these videos, many of them, in fact, getting, as I say, billions of views, of him on yachts, smoking cigars, surrounded by women, driving fast cars. And he tried to show himself as a man who has literally everything, and presenting this view of toxic masculinity that many men unfortunately want to conform to. And so either men watched it and thought, I aspire to that, I want to do that, or men watched it and potentially felt insecure by it, but still wanting to do that, and so engaging with women online. So it's quite a profitable, marketable business in the way that he used the webcam sites. And in many respects, the men who were actively engaging with Andrew Tate's material were also victims, as well as the women. He was grooming them to profiteer from them, and he did so successfully. But what do we do about the young men and boys that are watching this material, I think, is a really important question. So thank you to the person that has sent this in, because I think that it says an awful lot about the way in which men view and value women and girls in our society. And it does say a great deal about misogyny when 1 in 4 women are raped or sexually assaulted and 1 in 3 are experiencing domestic abuse. Andrew Tate, unfortunately, is saying what a great number of men think and would like to do to women. And I don't say that lightly, but looking at the statistics of how women are treated in our society, it's an extremely grim view. We need to start with schools. You know, we spoke before about rape culture
that's the problem,
in our
because
schools.
he is apparently very popular among sort of 13, 14, 15-year-old boys.
He is.
And schools are having to
absolutely,
cope with this.
Absolutely. And teachers are saying, you know, we've had teenage boys coming into our school and making comments that Andrew Tate has said on these videos, as if it's acceptable to speak to another girl in the classroom like that. And then we wonder why we have rife sexual harassment and rape culture in our schools, and that's part of the reason. We need to target it at an educational level early on. But of course, we've spoken about the teacher strikes and how teachers are struggling already with complex needs. And this is one of them. When you look at the way in which we have social media, which seeps into every aspect of young people's lives, as well as I think this is really critical, is showcasing the importance of healthy sexual relationships and partnerships. So rather than looking at relationships by way of owning a woman, predominantly by a man, we need to look at the fact that equality, mutuality and respect, enjoyment and pleasure amongst both parties is important. And that's something to be valued. And that's not what Andrew Tate does.
Wera.
So, Caroline, thank you for raising this issue, because it is so important that we continue to talk about misogyny. I've been trying on several occasions to bring in a law that would make misogyny a hate crime. Unfortunately, because the Law Society advised the government that it would actually make it more difficult to bring cases of violence against women and girls to court successfully, because you would also have to prove that it had a misogynistic motive. The government was advised against it. I still think that actually it would send a very strong signal that we as society are really stamping down on misogyny. And yes, this has to go through all society. That's education in schools, but also creating respectful workplaces. And I mentioned earlier, on Friday, I bring through Parliament my private member's bill to protect workers, employees from sexual harassment in the workplace and make employers responsible, that they have to be shown to have shown all reasonable steps to stop that sexual harassment. So we need, through the whole of society, a culture change that doesn't happen tomorrow, but we need to start, and we need to start big, and we need to start, I think, with changing the law and making misogyny a hate crime.
Winston.
I think why Andrew Tate is so dangerous is because half of what he says is actually inspiring in a good way. Now, that's not to say that half of what he says isn't absolutely repugnant, and I agree with a lot of what you said, Charlotte. But he does talk a lot as well about responsibility, about duty, and that's where it's dangerous. Now, you might have missed this, and he contradicts himself a lot of the time. This is another thing. Like, some videos he says misogynistic things, some other videos he says things where you've got to look after your spouse, your wife, and he is a self-contradictory character. Now, I think the way to get rid of someone like Andrew Tate is that we need more and better male role models in society. We need men who are actually honourable, who believe in duty and responsibility without that misogyny that we see from someone like Tate. And I don't know quite how we encourage that.
But they're not media worthy, are they? They're not going to get the headlines. It's well, bad news sells.
There are some examples. Let me give you an example. Someone like, I love this, Rashford was an example of this, and Sterling, the football players, because they changed football culture in a great way, because if you remember in the 90s, football was boozy and they weren't giving back. These young men, they make a fortune and they're investing back into their communities. And the way actually to deal with Tate is to have men like that, honourable men, being a better example.
Jonathan?
I think it's utterly appalling. I mean, I can't believe that people should waste their time putting threats like this on anybody, male or female. It's disgusting.
Right, let's move on. We've just got time to fit in another text question from Jennifer in Birmingham. The comedian Richard Herring says he won't be performing at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival this year because it's now becoming an event only for rich performers and rich audience members. Is British culture now a closed shop, which most of us aren't welcome to? Well, having performed at the Edinburgh Fringe last year, I can tell you that the audiences are not rich and most of the performers are not rich either, so I don't know where he's getting that from. Jonathan, let's start with you.
Well, I've been to the Edinburgh Festival a few times and I totally concur with everything you said, Ian, as I generally do. I don't think they're rich. Yeah, well, oh God, lucky me. No, I've always found the Edinburgh full of all ages, all backgrounds, all wealth or not wealth. I think it's a great gathering. It is a genuine festival.
Literary festivals being abolished, because they do tend to be sort of Guardian reading sort of gatherings, very sort of middle class.
I'm not clever enough to go to literary festivals. I do go to this festival.
We are in danger of creating a country where really culture and art and music is reserved only for the people who can afford it. And that starts with education in school again. We started with schools, we're ending with schools. Music education, for example, is miserable. I've become the chair of the APBD on music education.
We can't get music education on the question on the Edinburgh Fringe.
What I'm saying is we have to make sure that actually we are creating talent and access to arts and culture that is affordable.
And the Edinburgh Fringe has hundreds of shows which are free to people.
Exactly.
You don't even have to pay to go.
I haven't been.
You should.
Yeah.
I
haven't been recently.
Michelle Barnier has just agreed to be a guest on my show this year.
I wouldn't know.
Winston?
Zooming out a little bit, I'd say that one of the things, and this is from my experience in the music industry, one of the things I'd like to see is that the more successful artists or the big venues like the arenas actually taking on their social responsibility to, let's say if you're an arena, you build smaller venues, because smaller venues are closing down now very quickly. Bigger artists doing more to support younger artists. And I wonder if that applies to other arts as well, but I'd like to see that culture change.
Charlotte?
I've never actually been to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. I'd love to. In fact, I didn't even know it existed when I was at school. Went to a state school, never even heard of it until I went to university. So I think that sort of shows, how elitist it could be seen.
Well, if you wish to come to the Edinburgh Fringe this year, I will be there for 10 days doing Iain Dale All Talk and For the Many Live. Michelle Barnier is going to be one of my guests. I'm hoping Gordon Brown will be too. I hope you'll come, Charlotte. Right, one phrase answers for this final question from Matt in Chelmsford. Many shops are stocking Easter eggs already and have been since early January. When is the appropriate time for shops to start selling them and for us, the public, to start buying them? And I could ask, what's your favourite kind of Easter egg, Winston?
Well, if it's a Malteser, then there is no time too soon to start stocking Malteser eggs. That is the height of confectionery, and if you believe the early adverts from when they started, you actually lose weight by eating Maltesers. Yes, because they are so light.
On the way home, not white Maltesers though. That's
absolutely
sacrilegious.
not. Whoa.
Vera?
I'm a liberal. I wouldn't prescribe to anybody when they should start buying their Easter eggs. It's up to you. Buy them now, buy them later. It's up to you. Enjoy them when Easter comes.
fully agree with you as a diabetic. Jonathan?
I'm a conservative, so I wouldn't eat many of them.
I'd stuff my face on them in any chocolate, frankly.
These 2-for-1 Cadbury's cream eggs get me every single time. Charlotte, Jonathan, Vera and Winston, thank you very much indeed. In a moment, we're going to continue the discussion on bullying in the workplace. I want to know, have you been bullied in the workplace? If you reported it to your management, did they do anything? Or did you just think, well, if I say anything, if I'm a whistleblower, I'm going to lose my job? And how psychologically damaging can it be when you are bullied relentlessly day after day after day? Because I suppose people say, well, quit your job there. But why should you have to when it's you that is the innocent party? I want your stories in a moment. And what do you think should be done about bullying in the workplace? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the National Education Union estimates that more than 200,000 teachers